Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Fully Loaded Mortar and Pestle Pharmacy channel. My name is Nick Pender, your friendly neighborhood pharmacist, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is being asked in a lot of pharmacy circles and pharmacy student circles, which is pharmacy worth it in 2024? Stay tuned to find out. But before we get into that, I suppose I should do a brief introduction of myself since this is my first video. I've been a practicing pharmacist since 2018, and I feel like I've taken a path a bit less traveled in pharmacy. I have done kind of a little bit of everything. I'm currently practicing as a clinical pharmacist. I have done some manufacturing, compounding, I've done retail, I've been a PIC, I've been a PRN, I've been staff. So if you're going to want to hear about all those experiences I had, you're going to want to go ahead and like and subscribe, because I'm going to go through all of that, and as well as some tips and tricks on how to get into some of those different industries as well. And so without further ado, let's get into the topic at hand, right? It's kind of a loaded question. Is pharmacy worth it in 2024? All right, of course, in order to do this question justice, we're going to have to take a step back and kind of set some parameters for this. First of all, how do we answer a question this broad, right? I'm going to lean on some of my personal experience as well as some data that we have from surveys that were conducted from ASHP. I'll link those in the description below. And also, we'll have to use some background knowledge on what does it take to be a pharmacist, right? We have to kind of understand that in order to be able to answer that question. So let's start off with the pharmacy school experience itself. So pharmacy school is typically 4 years after prerequisites. Most people get a bachelor's degree. There are some people who kind of do the 6-year track. There are some schools that are 6-year tracks. Where basically you go in after high school, complete prerequisites, and then in 6 years you have your PharmD degree. The PharmD is required now, right? Like you have to have, at least in America, you have to have the Doctor of Pharmacy degree, as well as now, I will say if you really want to get into some of the more non-traditional aspects of pharmacy, basically non-dispensing roles, it's going to be highly encouraged. I would go ahead and say pretty much required that you're going to have to do some postgraduate training, right? So residencies, fellowships, and things of that nature. So pharmacy school is a huge part of the journey, right? Pharmacy school is long, it's difficult, it can be expensive, right? That's going to be a huge factor in whether this degree is going to be worth it for you. How much do you spend getting the training? How much is pharmacy school for you? If you have to go in a couple $100,000 of debt, that's something to consider, right? It's intense. It's not a comfortable process. When I was in pharmacy school, that's all I did. I did nothing else. I feel like it took huge chunks of my personal life. Now, I think it took part of my health. I was staying up late, surviving off of caffeine and vending machines. Just trying to make sure that I was, doing the best that I could to get situated for a career that I would like. The workload is heavy. There's also rotations, right? So on top of that, you have to go to rotation sites and kind of, train and work for free. That's basically what your last year of pharmacy school is like. So that's something to consider when we start talking about, is this path worth it or not? Do you want to commit pretty much all of your waking hours to the next 4 years pursuing this degree? And keep in mind, that's just the bare minimum. That is just to be able to consider yourself a pharmacist, let alone actually what it takes to get a job that you would actually want to be in. Okay, so that's just a brief synopsis of pharmacy school. I'm actually probably going to do an entire video on pharmacy school experience, so look out for that. Once again, if you want to see that, like and subscribe. But assuming that you're okay with all of that, all right? So you graduate. Congratulations. Here you go. You're brand new PharmD. So what do you do now? What are your options, right? So it's another factor that's going to heavily contribute as to whether this is going to be worth it for you or not. So let's talk about all the different aspects that you can get into as a pharmacist. All right, so first and foremost, probably the aspect that everyone's most familiar with and knows about, retail pharmacy, right? So this is CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, the people that you see in the store with the white coats handing you your meds when you give them a prescription. Okay, traditional dispensing roles probably makes up, well, this definitely makes up the largest portion of pharmacy jobs. Right, so just keep that in mind as well. Like I said, most common path, especially right out of school. What are the pros? Great pay, right? Great pay right out of school, for one. This is probably going to be your highest paying option as soon as you graduate. You're going to be able to be eligible for bonuses and things like that, especially if you take on a manager role, which I know it's considered an entry-level field, right? Retail, but you can get manager roles for retail pharmacy right out of school. These come with bonus structures. Right now, with some of the stores that are struggling, you do have the option to get signing bonuses. It's probably not everywhere, but some maybe understaffed, underserved areas where they're really desperate for a pharmacist, you can still find signing bonuses for retail. All right, so those are the pros. So let's talk about some of the negatives of retail pharmacy. Okay, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So this is probably the most physically demanding of pharmacy jobs. You're going to be on your feet all day, right? And when I say all day, I mean all day. These are typically not 8-hour shifts. These are typically 10 to 12-hour shifts, or straight up open to close, whatever those hours are. You're just going to be there open to close. They just now, for a lot of retail pharmacies, just now started letting pharmacists take lunch breaks, like designated lunch breaks, where they say, listen, I'm closing the pharmacy. You guys are going to have to wait for 30 minutes, because I think it's the longest one I've actually seen. So keep in mind, you're going to work 10, 12 hours and get one 30-minute lunch break. Yeah. So think about that. And it's all on your feet. Retail pharmacists do not sit down. They have a desk. It's a standing desk. But you're going to be on your feet, shuffling around all day. So think about that. You're going to be dealing with the public. Okay? That is not easy. Especially in this day and age. People are a little different now, I would say. This puts you subject to, bad attitudes, things you can't control, corporate policies. They're cracking down on opioid prescribing. So you're going to have to be at the forefront of telling the patients, like, hey, I can't give you this. And then however they respond, you're going to be the one that's there dealing with it. Robberies as well. When people can't get their stuff and they decide they want to rob your store, most of the time they're looking for the person in the white coat because they know you have access to all the good stuff. I have stories of a lot of my friends who work retail that have had a loaded weapon put to the back of their head as they're waiting for a controlled substance safe to open or whatever. So that's something that you're going to be subject to. And when you first graduate, who do you think they're putting in the store, that is least desirable? Who do you think they're putting in the store in the bad neighborhood? Who do you think they're putting in the store that has a super high turnover rate? It's going to be the new grad. So something to think about. All right. Not a lot of work-life balance here, especially with the 12-hour situation. A lot of these stores, because of the situations, there's a lot of call-outs. There's a lot of, people no-call, no-shows, and they're going to call you, like when you're off, and ask. When that person who's supposed to be in doesn't come in, they're going to call you on your day off, and they're going to ask, they're going to put pressure on you to try and come in and cover those shifts, all right? So some interesting data here from that APHA study. 58% of retail pharmacists reported being satisfied with their jobs, right? And so that's 42% who are not. That's a large number. That's pretty close to a 60-40 split for satisfaction, all right? And so you got to think about, what is it that, especially for one of the highest paying sectors of pharmacy, especially right out of school, why are 42% of people dissatisfied with their job? In a 2023 study from APHA, 70% of retail pharmacists reported feeling burned out at least once a week. At least once a week. 70%. So I think there may be some correlation between the burnout rate burnout feeling rate to the job satisfaction rate, right? I did retail pharmacy for a brief time. I can say it wasn't my favorite. The store that I was in, I worked for probably the best company that you could for retail. I won't, obviously disclose that here, but it was a decent experience. I worked at a slow store. It did have a drive-through window. I wasn't super crazy happy about that, but it was very doable. But I did, while I was at my store, get a chance to float at other stores, float and train at other stores, and saw how difficult it could get. It varies greatly on your store, the staff that you work with, and the workload that you have. So there are pockets of retail where people are super satisfied, but then there's just as many where you could easily walk yourself into a nightmare situation. And the issue is that you don't have a ton of control, right? If you've been paying attention to the news that you've seen in the pharmacy industry as well, it's odd that it's not like front page news. I feel like it's not a thing that gets like blasted out there like when there's layoffs and like the tech industry or something like that. But CVS is planning to close around 900 stores, I think, in the next few years, as well as this year, Rite Aid, I think, just finished closing a ton of stores. So you don't have a ton of control over where you want to work. That used to be a perk of retail, was that you kind of, had a job anywhere you went, but I think that's changing now. And so I'll definitely be staying tuned to how all of this shakes out. And I'll probably do a video on it later, so it's a chance to subscribe. Just saying. All right, the next sector is going to be health system pharmacy, clinical pharmacy. All right, this is where I fit in. This is where I started out after graduating pharmacy school. I did not do a residency. I was one of the lucky few who had a position kind of waiting on me to do some intern work that I did during school, and that was where I started off as a technician as well. I did start off as a technician before I became a pharmacist. Fun fact. All right. So one of the biggest pros here is like there's a huge delta here from work-life balance perspective. Okay, it's night and day, so you have a lot of flexibility. I do 8-hour shifts when I go in. There are also, for those who like the kind of 12-hour deal, there are 12-hour shifts you can do. Some hospitals have a setup where you do 4 10s and then you're off 3 days. Some hospitals have, especially for like the overnight position, you have 7 on, 7 off, 10 hours, or 7 on, 7 off, 12 hours, and you make a little bit more. There's differentials. I get a differential for working in a hospital. So if I'm in the hospital at an odd hour, they add money onto my hourly rate, which is great. Like, it's a very human thing to do. Say, hey, I'm taking you away from your family time here in the evening, or I'm taking you away from your kids on the weekends. Let me add a little something to your check for that. I really appreciate that. I don't work alone, right? When I go to the hospital, I work with other pharmacists. I have a clinical coordinator. I have a operations manager. I have a director. There's a lot more structure there. There's people who I can reach out to. I really value that as a pharmacist, because sometimes, especially doing clinical work, you just have questions, especially about when things kind of get in a gray area. It's very hard to explain for those who don't practice. I know all the pharmacists will feel me, like how relieved you would be to sometimes just lean over and say, hey, what do you think about this vanc dosing? Or what do you think about this antibiotic dose for somebody who's maybe borderline renal insufficiency? Should we leave this alone? Should we not? It's just being able to have those conversations with other pharmacists and kind of peep and see how they practice really helps your own practice. So I really appreciate that about clinical pharmacy, or at least where I work. I know it's not, like that everywhere. Okay. Yeah, some of the cons. So just kind of like we talked about, the flexibility of hours. So some of those hours can get a little odd, right? I would say it's not as many hours as retail, but there are definitely times where I have to work evening shifts and variable shifts. So it's not always, 7 to 3 p.m. Sometimes it's, 3 to 10 p.m. Sometimes it's 3 to 10 p.m. and then I have to get back up and go from 7 to 3, right? Like those doing the shift work. Somebody calls out overnight, we kind of have a pool and we say, hey, who's gonna go and cover the overnight shift for, however long that person's gonna be out. There's, holidays, right? So guess what? Hospitals don't close on holidays. We have to work. And hospitals don't work that well without pharmacy departments. And so, when those holidays come up, everybody has to take their turn, biting the bucket, so to speak, and sitting in the pharmacy on Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that. And that can be really annoying, especially if you kind of have family traditions, plans, and rituals that you might have to check out of every now and then and say, hey, this is my Christmas to work, and I'm gonna miss whatever festivities. Save me a turkey leg. So let's look at the data for clinical pharmacy. All right, according to the 2023 study done by ASHP, 74% of health system and clinical pharmacists reported high job satisfaction. All right, so we kind of see like a 50% shift in the job satisfaction surveys. Right now, remember, one's done by APHA. This one's done by ASHP, which is the health system pharmacy organization. So, right, it kind of aligns with what my thoughts are, which is we go from retail to hospital and we see a huge jump in work-life balance. Okay. So, right, so even here, right, burnout rates are still a concern, with about 45% of clinical pharmacists reporting burnout, often due to high workloads during peak times and the emotional toll of patient care. All right, this is definitely a con of clinical pharmacy. Okay, especially if you're just starting out. So when I was doing it, I started out in COVID, right in the middle of COVID, and it was crazy. It was nuts. It was, hospitals couldn't keep up, staffing wise, facility wise, especially in the pharmacy department. There was a huge concern on where the doctors and nurses were going to come from, but for pharmacy, it was literally, for us, work faster. We didn't get relief staff or anything like that. We just had to try to make do with what we had during that time. And so this survey was taken in 2023. So grain of salt with the kind of COVID experience there. So I would say, maybe if they taken this survey in 2018, it comes out even more favorable. But even with the COVID workload, it's still we had 45% burnout, and then for hospital, and then 70% burnout retail pharmacy. That tells you that even though that burnout number is high, it's much better for the hospital pharmacist than it is for retail pharmacists. Okay. All right, then we have the Holy Grail, industry pharmacy. All right, so when you think of industry pharmacy, these are, I don't want to say the joke that I want to say, but these are like the big guys, right? The Pfizer's, GSK, that's GlaxoSmithKline, Eli Lilly. So those big pharmacy names that you kind of see on the commercials and things like that. Yes, they do hire pharmacists, and this is kind of in pharmacy kind of considered like, I guess, the holy grail of pharmacy jobs. And we'll talk about why. All right. So these pretty much offer the highest salaries in the field. All right. And that was something I didn't talk about with hospital, right? So in hospital, one of the cons is going to be you're not going to make as much money in the hospital, especially starting out, as you do in retail pharmacy. To get to the point that you start matching some of those retail pharmacy salaries, you're going to have to work for quite a while in the hospital system. Okay. Another con of the hospital system is the training. So in order to get in, it's going to take more than your PharmD. I'm just going to tell you right now, there are a few people like myself, and keep in mind, this is 6 years ago for me that I started doing clinical pharmacy. There are going to be people who tell you, oh, you can get in without a board certification, or you can get in without doing a residency. And you can, it happens, but it doesn't happen a lot. And Once you kind of commit to one of those other areas of pharmacy, it's going to be really difficult for you to be able to get into clinical pharmacy. All right. So back to industry pharmacy, the holy grail. Sorry about that. A little hard to follow. This is known for offering some of the highest salaries in pharmacy. All right, straight up. Some of the industry pharmacists that I know are making over $200,000, right, a year. These are the best working positions you're going to find in pharmacy. And hands down, bar none. They have a work condition, they have a work set up for you that will be favorable. However you feel about it. You want to come into the office all the time and see people, you can do that. You like to travel, they have travel positions. You want to work from home, this is pretty much one of the few pharmacies, our areas in pharmacy where you can get a work from home position. All right, there's flexible hours, workloads, and you pretty much work with one thing at a time. Whereas, in retail, you're the kitchen sink, man. You're just in there and anything can happen at any point in time. You can get a question about anything, vaccines, testing now. Like if you've done retail recently, you can see that like there's, somebody comes in and wants a COVID test, that we're doing that, right? Like A1C testing, a lot of retail places are doing A1C testing. It's nuts. And then, clinical pharmacy is a little less, right? But, even when I'm on a clinical shift, like kind of anything can get dropped off in our lab. Like a doctor can call, hey, I need, dosing for a K-Centra, which is clotting factors, right? Because somebody's bleeding, or, hey, we need to make this drip stat. There are a lot of emergency situations that show up in the hospital. We, at our hospital, our pharmacists actually do go to code, situations basically where somebody is, rapidly deteriorating, and, there's kind of a team that goes and do like CPR rounds and administers medications for advanced cardiac life support. And we send pharmacists to those codes as well. So that's something that can kind of get dropped off in your lab when you are practicing clinical pharmacy too. But industry, nope. You kind of have your set workload. A lot of times you're only working on one drug or one line of drugs at a time. Now keep in mind, this is all, I haven't worked in industry. I have a lot of friends who do work in industry and they tell me about it all the time. They're always telling me, Nick, you got to try to get in. I love it. These are probably the only pharmacists that I talk to that are like, that advocate for the sector of pharmacy that they work in, okay? But however, as good as it sounds, industry pharmacy does come with cons, and let's talk about it. So, con number one, maybe the only true con. Well, there's two true cons. Con number one is there's a lot of volatility in industry pharmacy. So you could be working on a drug or a project, and that wing of the company gets cut off or gets defunded or something like that, and that's like, whoop, boom, you're out of a job. Yeah, that happens. That happens quite a bit. And the double whammy to that, I'm going to list it as its own con. It doesn't have to be a con, but it is a con, essentially, is that for these other areas of pharmacy, you kind of have to be doing them constantly in order to remain relevant, right? If you do retail, if you stop doing retail for a certain amount of months, you'd be really uncomfortable trying to go back. If you've never done retail, you'd be extremely uncomfortable trying to go from industry into, staffing a shift at CVS. Same thing with clinical pharmacy. I mean, there's times that, like, if I take a week off and I come back, I'm like, oh man, like, it takes me a little bit to kind of catch up and get back into the groove. Obviously, if you've never done it, that would be tenfold. So when you're in industry pharmacy and you're working at a pace that's much slower than most other pharmacy industries, it's not like if you do lose your job or your wing does get shut down, you're kind of stuck in essence, right? You're kind of like, hey, I have to get another industry job because the skills that I have in industry aren't really transferable to clinical or retail pharmacy. So, and then I'd imagine just in a quality of life setting, right? Like if you've got this home life schedule that's built around you working from home, or you only having to go into the office 3 or 4 times a week, you're not going to be able to drop that schedule and say, all right, here I am, I'm ready to clock in 60 hours a week at CVS, or even 40, 50 hours a week at your local hospital. So the pro kind of becomes a con in a sense. So this year, obviously the burnout is low, right? So they report only 30% of pharmacists in this field report feeling frequent burnout. And I don't even think they have a dissatisfaction questionnaire that they did for these folks. And here's the note on the burnout for industry pharmacy, right? They report frequent burnout mainly due to constant travel requirements and job instability. So kind of those two cons that I talked about, right? And I imagine everyone's job, right, that you would get paid to do has a certain level of burnout. But it's weird that the reasons for burnout for this industry is going to be kind of like I talked about, that fear of potentially losing your job and traveling. There are a lot of travel positions that require constant travel in industry. It may be fun at first if you're into that, but I imagine like if you had a family, you had a kid or something like that, it gets really old really quick. So that's another thing to think about when you're talking about industry. All right. So lastly, there are, and these are just the big 3, right? So I would call these like the big pharmacy 3, where everybody kind of knows about. But even outside of that, there are a ton of other niches that you can get into in pharmacy. I'm not going to talk about them extensively, because I don't have experience in them, and what I'm talking about is things that I've seen or things that I know because I've talked to people who actually work in these industries. So I have very little experience in any of these other industries, but I'm going to kind of briefly let you know what they are and talk about it. All right. So there's poison control. Kind of like what I understand about this is that you kind of sit there and, if you get a basically drug information job, right? So your job is to sit there and I guess answer antidotes. Once again, I don't really know a ton about poison control. Maybe if somebody works in poison control, they can chime in the comments and let me know what it's like working from poison control. I'd really appreciate that perspective. Nuclear pharmacy. So nuclear pharmacy is its own niche, right? There's extra training to get into that, and so basically a nuclear pharmacist is a pharmacist who prepares chemotherapeutic medications. And there's all sorts of standards that they probably don't even talk about in pharmacy school that are required to get that. Once again, I don't have a lot of experience in nuclear pharmacy. I don't really know any nuclear pharmacists, so I would really appreciate if you are a nuclear pharmacist or you work in nuclear pharmacy, drop me a comment, let me know what it's like, let's talk about it, shoot me a message, however you want to get that information to me, let me know. I'd love to have a conversation about nuclear pharmacy. All right. There's also PBM, working for PBMs. Now, I've never worked for PBMs, and so what PBM stands for is Pharmacy Benefit Manager. But as far as I understand it, and maybe they help, with prior authorization requests or something like that. Once again, I don't know. I'm not going to talk extensively about it. I'm just going to make myself look stupid. But once again, if you know something about PBMs, drop me a line. I'd love to have a conversation about it and potentially do a video on it. All right. Yeah, there's informatics, which is kind of a budding thing in pharmacy, where you pretty much go and help a major CPOE system, which is basically a computer order entry, something like for people who work clinical pharmacy, something like Cerner or Epic. I'm sure there's a plethora of more out there, but just helping them code and collect data and help them figure out what pharmacists really need to help them in their clinical jobs. All right. So that's pretty much all the sectors of pharmacy that you can work in. And so let's talk about them as a whole. As which area you pharmacy you work in is really going to be a huge determinant as to whether pharmacy is worth it for you or not. All right, so with all of that being said, we talked about pharmacy school. We talked about what do some of the different areas of pharmacies that you can even work in feel like. Let's try to tackle the actual question, which is pharmacy worth it in 2024? So, of course, the answer is going to be, it depends. It depends on if you feel like you can land a job in one of those sectors that you feel comfortable working in. And so I will say, if you can get into clinical pharmacy, I think it's totally worth it. You have a decent work-life balance. You are going to make good money, because the reality is, even though some pharmacy sectors pay more or less, it's all good. And what's going to impact this decision is mainly going to be, how much does it cost you to get out of pharmacy school? What is the interest rate on your loans? How far away are you from being able to complete a pharmacy degree, right? How much stress does that cause you? So what I would say is, what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't take out, enough money to buy a house, to go to pharmacy school, to come out and do retail pharmacy. Especially right now. It's scary. Retail pharmacy is in the middle of, I think, some really huge changes. And I don't think anyone can say for certain what retail pharmacy is going to look like in the next 10 years. Point blank. Clinical pharmacy is a lot more stable. I think if you can land a role in industry, you should do that. It's great. It's probably always going to be great. These are the people who make the most money in pharmacy, which is the drug companies themselves. Landing a role with them is going to be your most lucrative, most flexible option. The problem is that in order of job supply and difficulty to get into, it's inverse. So it's a lot easier to get into retail. It's easier to get into hospital than it is industry. Industry is very difficult to get into. And kind of like what I talked about earlier in the video is, I don't even know pharmacists that work in some of those other niches. I don't know a drug information pharmacist. I don't know a pharmacist that works for a PBM. I don't know a nuclear pharmacist. So these are pretty rare jobs, the ones that tend to be more lucrative and more worth it. And what are your connections like? What do people who graduate from your pharmacy school do after they graduate? Is a question that I would look at getting answered before you committed to that pharmacy school. Are they linked in with fellowship programs that can help you land a job in pharma? Are they linked in with residency programs that can help you land a great clinical role? What are their NAPLEX pass rates, right? So questions to ask before you get into, because as you can see, it's a tale of several different industries, and you have pharmacists that feel like it's totally not worth it and just completely dissatisfied and burnt out, and then you have pharmacists that as you get into different sectors that feel like they're very quiet, don't talk about complaining too much. And I think you probably saw on the news that there were even pharmacy walkouts earlier this year for a lot of the retail pharmacies. So something to consider. So if you put like a gun to my head and said, Nick, is pharmacy worth it in 2024? I would have to say, as a general answer, my answer would be no. This doesn't mean I'm dissatisfied with my career. I actually like what I do. But my general answer would be no for these reasons. The cost of pharmacy school and your job prospects after you graduate. Those things are very mismatched right now. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. That could change. It could look totally different in 5 years. It may not. It may look worse in 5 years. We don't know. But I think it would be irresponsible for me to recommend pharmacy to anyone right now, just because there's so many sweeping changes I feel like are coming, and there's a ton of uncertainty. And if you get into one of those areas of pharmacy like retail, here's the thing that people don't talk about. When you get into retail, it's very difficult to get out once you've been there for a certain amount of time. And so for me to be able to say, oh, well, hey, you can get into pharmacy, and if you try retail, you just go work in a hospital. Well, it doesn't quite work like that. You very easily get stuck in one sector of pharmacy and kind of get blackballed. Or people look at you and they say, oh, you're a retail pharmacist. And in order for you to get out, you're going to have to make a Herculean effort to show someone that you're worthy of, being able to take on a clinical role now, or being able to get into industry now. There is a supply issue, right? There at a certain point, and it was around the time that I, applied to pharmacy school as well. They just opened up all these pharmacy schools and started pumping graduates out for a job supply that just wasn't increasing. And so when there's an industry role, what do you think is happening there? Like the 42% of dissatisfied retail pharmacists and 20% of dissatisfied hospital pharmacists are probably all applying to that industry job, and probably drowning you out, right? So just something to think about there is those factors that are going to decide, and I would just have to say, in general, no. Now, if you tell me you have a surefire pathway to a job at Pfizer, go for it. If you tell me that you got a surefire pathway to a clinical pharmacy role, go for it. I mean, that's kind of what I had. Go for it, sure. But if you're kind of unsure, if you're on the fence, if you're just kind of thinking that it looks cool, I might want to get into it, or if you've got a lot of other options lined up, I would probably tell you to really lean into some of those other options if you weren't 100% sure about what you would do after you graduate. But hey, that's just my 2 cents. Of course, take anything I say or anything anyone says with a grain of salt. But yeah, I think we covered it. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Like I said, if you work in one of those areas of pharmacy that I don't know a ton about, let me know. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Drop me a DM. Let's talk about it. All right. See you guys in the comment section. Peace out.